They told her marriage was the dream, that if she gave enough, forgave enough, stayed long enough, love would come back around. But it didn't. She gave her best years, her quiet strength, her sleepless nights, her silent tears, and in return, she was overlooked, dismissed, expected to keep giving. Until one day, she stopped. Today, more and more older women are walking away from relationships, not out of bitterness, but from clarity. They are not lonely. They are not broken. They are not waiting. They are choosing. Choosing themselves for the first time in a very long time. In this video, we will uncover the real reasons why older women across America are deciding to stay single, not as a last resort, but as a powerful, deliberate act of self-preservation and rebirth. These aren't surface-level decisions. These are stories written in silence, in resilience, in years of putting everyone else first. This is not just about being single. It's about what it took to get here and what it means to finally come home to yourself. 1. Decades of emotional neglect. She didn't leave because of a big fight, or a dramatic betrayal, or some sudden realization. She left, or chose not to return to love, because of something quieter, something that built up, drop by drop over the years. She left because she was emotionally invisible. You see, when you live with someone who doesn't really see you, it feels like you're fading, slowly, painfully. You're making dinner while swallowing hurt. You're smiling at family gatherings while quietly aching inside. You're sitting beside him on the couch, but there's a mile between your bodies and a universe between your hearts. And still, she stayed. For the kids, for the routine, for the idea of stability, for fear of starting over at 50 or 60. She told herself, this is just how marriage is. She convinced herself it was selfish to want more, to want conversation, emotional warmth, understanding. She made herself smaller, quieter. She adjusted and adapted and compromised until she no longer recognized the woman in the mirror. And when the silence became too loud to ignore, something inside her broke. But not in a dramatic way. It was more like a door slowly closing, quietly locking itself from the inside. She stopped expecting him to change. She stopped hoping he'd listen. And in that moment, she realized, if she was going to be lonely either way, she might as well be alone on her own terms. Now, in her singlehood, she doesn't have to wait for validation. She doesn't have to explain why she's sad, or hide her joy, or shrink to avoid conflict. She can cry and laugh in the same hour and not feel guilty. She can speak, and her voice echoes back, not as an argument, but as freedom. For decades, she was emotionally starved. Now, she's emotionally free. That shift, from neglected to seen, even if only by herself, is powerful. It's not just about avoiding pain. It's about finally choosing wholeness. 2. Tired of being the strong one. Everyone came to her when they needed something. When the kids were in trouble. When her husband lost a job or got sick. When her sister divorced or her parents got old. She was the one they leaned on, again and again. The one who never broke. The one who always had it together. She never asked for that role, but she carried it, like generations of women before her. And she wore it like armor. Always composed, always capable, always self-sacrificing. But behind that armor was a tired woman, aching for someone to finally say, you don't have to do this alone anymore. But no one ever did. She didn't fall apart because she was weak. She fell apart because she had been strong for too long, and no one noticed. Her tears were private, her pain unspoken, because strong women aren't allowed to need help, and so she carried everyone, including herself, until she just couldn't. Now, when people ask her why she's single, they say it with confusion. You're such a catch. Why are you alone? What they don't see is that she's not lonely. She's resting. Resting from a lifetime of giving. Resting from years of fixing everything and getting nothing back. Resting from always being the safety net, never the one caught. She no longer wants to be needed. She wants to be valued. She doesn't want to carry someone else's emotional weight. She wants lightness, softness, ease. And if she can't have that in a relationship, she'd rather have it alone. Because now she understands that strength isn't just about surviving hard things. Real strength is also knowing when to say, enough. 3. Mistrust born from betrayal. She never thought it would happen to her. Betrayal was something that happened to other people. People on TV, in novels, in faraway stories. But not her. Not after all she gave. Not after all the sacrifices, the loyalty, the quiet forgiveness. But it did. Maybe he had an affair. Maybe it was emotional. Maybe it was financial. Maybe it was years of lying, gaslighting, hiding things behind smiles and Sunday dinners. Whatever it wasn't just the act. It was the break of everything she believed in. The shattering of safety. Betrayal isn't just about broken promises. It's about losing the ground beneath your feet. It's the kind of pain that rewires you. And once you've been hurt that deeply, you don't go back to being who you were. You become cautious, protective, sometimes even suspicious. Not because you're bitter, but because you've learned that people are not always what they seem. So now, years later, when a nice man smiles at her at the grocery store or asks her out at church, she doesn't melt. She scans for danger. She wonders what he wants, what he's hiding, what price she might pay to let someone close again. She doesn't say yes, not because she can't, but because she won't gamble with her peace. She's rebuilt herself brick by brick. She's tender but solid, and she knows what it took to get here. So no, she's not easily trusting, but she's deeply wise. Her mistrust isn't a wall, it's a boundary. It's a message that says, you'll have to show me more than charm. You'll have to earn this. Because she gave her heart away once, fully, freely, and it was crushed. Now she guards it, not out of fear, but out of respect, for herself, for her healing, and for the life she finally feels safe in, even if she walks it alone. 4. Marriages that silenced their voice. For years, she was told to pick her battles, to let things go, to keep the peace. And so she did. One moment, one opinion, one piece of herself at a time. In her marriage, she became a master of silence, not because she had nothing to say, but because saying it never changed anything. She learned quickly that honesty came with a price. If she spoke up, she was too emotional. If she disagreed, she was difficult. If she had needs, she was needy. And so she adapted. She swallowed her truth. She minimized her dreams. She made herself agreeable, easy, invisible. People think silence in a relationship is peaceful, but it's not. It's lonely. It's suffocating. It's the slow death of identity. Over time, she didn't recognize herself anymore. She was a version of the woman she once was, softer, quieter, but not in the way that brings peace, in the way that means surrender. And the worst part? No one noticed. Not her husband, not her kids, not even herself at times, because she functioned so well on the outside. She smiled, she served, she supported, and no one ever asked what she had given up to keep it all going. But eventually, her silence turned to resentment. She wasn't angry at first. She was just tired. Tired of not being heard. Tired of explaining herself. Tired of playing a role that no longer fit. And when she finally walked away, or simply chose not to go back into another relationship, it wasn't an act of rebellion. It was an act of remembering. remembering her voice, her desires, her right to take up space. Now, in her solitude, she speaks freely. She laughs loudly. She sings in the kitchen. She talks to herself in the mirror, not because she's crazy, but because for the first time, someone is actually listening. And that listener is her. 5. They were never truly seen. She was praised for being a good wife, a good mother, a good woman. But those words, while meant as compliments, always made her uneasy. Because they didn't describe her. They described her function. She wasn't seen as a full person. She was seen as a role. The cook, the caretaker, the comforter, the one who remembered birthdays, kept the family calendar, folded the towels just right. The one who never forgot, never failed, never faltered. At least in the eyes of those who depended on her. But inside, she had a whole world no one ever asked about. Thoughts, opinions, stories, desires. And when she tried to share them, in conversation, in disagreement, in vulnerability, they were often ignored or dismissed. It wasn't malicious. It was cultural, generational, expected. She wasn't someone to understand. She was someone to rely on. And so, she began to disappear. Slowly, quietly. Until even she questioned whether her inner life mattered anymore. She stopped writing. She stopped painting. She stopped asking questions or telling stories. She became, in essence, a background character in her own life. But something changes with time, with age. When the noise settles and the demands lessen, she begins to remember. She begins to see herself again. And when that happens, the idea of entering another relationship, one where she has to play a part again, feels unbearable. She doesn't want to be needed. She wants to be known. She wants someone to ask, what lights you up? What scares you? What do you still dream about? And if she can't find that, if all that's offered is another man who sees her as a helper, a nurse, a sidekick, then she would rather be alone. Because now, she's finally seeing herself. And she refuses to go unseen again. 6. Exhaustion from carrying generational expectations. She grew up in a world where women were taught that their value came from serving others, that a good woman sacrifices, a good wife endures, a good mother gives, and keeps giving. Love was not something you received freely. It was something you earned by doing more, giving more, being more. So she learned to suppress her needs, to prioritize everyone else, to call it strength, even when it felt like self-abandonment. Her mother did it. Her grandmother did it. And she was expected to carry that legacy, smiling all the way. She was told that women are the heart of the home, but no one ever asked how the heart feels when it's breaking. For decades, she performed perfectly until it started to show. In her body, in her bones, in her chronic stress and subtle sadness, in the way she sighed when no one was looking, in the dreams that faded quietly without ever being spoken aloud. And then, somewhere in her 50s or 60s, she started to question it all. What if love wasn't supposed to feel like a job? What if partnership wasn't supposed to feel like a duty? What if the idea that women are born to serve is not just outdated, but harmful? It hit her hard, like waking up from a long sleep, and suddenly, everything she had accepted began to feel wrong. The expectations, the quiet suffering, the way no one ever told her she had a choice. So now, she chooses differently. She chooses not to enter another relationship where she has to prove her worth. She chooses not to live under the weight of a history she never agreed to. She chooses herself, not as a rebellious act, but as a sacred one. And in doing so, she becomes the first woman in her family line to break the cycle. The first to say, "My life is mine." And that, to her, is worth more than any ring. 7. Disillusionment with the fantasy of romance. She was raised on fairy tales, on stories where the prince came and everything suddenly made sense, where love was the answer, where happily ever after was not just a dream, it was the goal. She grew up believing that marriage meant safety, love meant forever, and that her role was to be chosen, cherished, and protected. And so she waited. She gave. She loved hard. She made allowances. She stayed through hard seasons, believing that love required sacrifice, that to be a good woman, she had to endure. And maybe, in the beginning, she did feel something magical, something hopeful. But over time, reality came knocking. Romance faded into routine. Partnership morphed into imbalance. The happily ever after she imagined became a slow burn of disappointment. Sometimes it was subtle. He stopped listening, stopped showing interest, stopped asking questions. Sometimes it was sharp. Cruelty in his tone, distance in his touch, indifference in moments that should have mattered. She held on for years, telling herself it was just a phase, that maybe she was expecting too much, that real love isn't like the movies. But deep down, she grieved the fantasy. Not because she wanted a perfect man, but because she wanted to feel wanted, to feel seen, to feel like her love wasn't being taken for granted. Now, at this stage in life, she sees clearly. Romance was never the answer. Love, the kind she longed for, doesn't mean losing herself in someone else. It doesn't mean fixing, rescuing, tolerating. It doesn't mean staying out of fear or obligation. So when people ask why she's single, she smiles. A soft, knowing smile. Not because she doesn't believe in love anymore, but because she believes in a different kind now. A love that starts with self. That doesn't come wrapped in fantasy. That doesn't ask her to shrink. And if she ever lets someone in again, it won't be because she needs saving. It'll be because she chooses, fully, freely, and without compromise. But until then, her solitude is not empty. It's honest. It's whole. It's hers. 8. Pain from being too much or not enough. She heard it her whole life, in words spoken and in silences that cut even deeper. She was too emotional, too intense, too opinionated, too loud. Or, at other times, she wasn't enough. Not soft enough, not thin enough, not quiet or accommodating or pretty enough. It was like there was a constantly shifting bar she was expected to reach, and she never quite got there. At first, she tried to adjust. She dimmed her light when it made others uncomfortable. She made herself smaller in rooms that didn't feel safe. She apologized for things that weren't wrong. Her laugh, her tears, her anger. She edited herself to fit the version of woman the world seemed to prefer. In relationships, it was even worse. She learned quickly that strength could be threatening, that her ambition might be called arrogance, that her need for emotional intimacy might be labeled clingy or too needy. She twisted herself into shapes she didn't recognize, all to make a man stay, to make him love her, to keep the peace. But here's the thing about contortion. It's unsustainable. One day, she looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the woman staring back. Not because she had aged, but because she had disappeared. Piece by piece, comment by comment, compromise by compromise, she had erased herself. It took years to rebuild, to say, I'm not too much. I was just too much for the wrong people. To realize that being enough was never about fitting into someone else's expectations. It was about embracing herself, fully, loudly, without apology. So now, she doesn't chase love. She doesn't bend to be accepted. She doesn't water herself down. If a man finds her too intense, too smart, too opinionated, she lets him go, because she's no longer afraid of being alone. What she is afraid of is losing herself again. Being single for her is no longer a placeholder. It's a declaration. a statement that says, I am enough, as I am. She's not interested in proving her worth. She's not here to audition for someone else's comfort. She's not going to dim her light to make someone else shine brighter. For the first time in her life, she's standing in the full power of who she is. Not too much, not too little, just right, for herself. 9. The fear of becoming someone's nurse, not partner. She's been there before, not just once, but many times. The unspoken expectation, the quiet assumption that as the woman in the relationship, she would become the caregiver, the one to remember the pills, make the appointments, cook the meals, clean the mess, soothe the moods. It happened with her husband, then maybe again with her aging parents, and even with her own grown children, who, even with their good intentions, always seemed to circle back to her for help. She never resented it, not at first. She did it out of love, out of duty, out of habit. She did it because she didn't know she had a choice. But over time, something inside her began to resist. Not with anger, but with exhaustion. As she entered her 60s, then 70s, she began to realize something profound. That while men age, they often still expect a woman to take care of them, to cook, clean, manage their lives, to provide emotional labor with little in return. They don't always say it outright, but the expectation hangs in the air. A man in his 70s might want a companion, but when you look closer, what he's really seeking is a combination of mother, maid, manager, and nurse. And that realization, subtle but sharp, changed everything. She began to look at dating differently, not with bitterness, but with clarity. She saw how many older men were still looking for someone to take care of them, while few offered to care for her in return. She saw how little energy she had left to give to someone who wouldn't truly reciprocate, and she asked herself a question no one had asked her before. Who will take care of me? The answer came slowly, but firmly. I will. She is not interested in another relationship where she will slowly fade into a caregiver role again. She's not going to trade her freedom for dependency, her peace for obligation, her joy for duty. Not anymore. Being single for her is not about pushing others away. It's about drawing a line, a boundary that says, I've served, I've given, I've carried, and now it's time for me to be. She takes her morning tea in silence. She takes long walks without explaining where she's going. She has days where she does nothing at all and feels no guilt, because she knows now that rest is not laziness. It's restoration. It's earned. She still believes in love, but it must come as a partnership, not a project. As companionship, not caretaking. If it doesn't, she's happy to stay where she is, whole, peaceful, and finally free. 10. They've fallen in love with themselves. This might be the greatest twist of all. After years of searching for love in others, in husbands, in family, in children, in the approval of society, she has finally found the one person who never left her, never betrayed her, never asked her to be someone else, herself. It didn't happen quickly. It took time. Time alone. Time in grief. Time in confusion. Time in rediscovery. There were long, quiet evenings when the house felt too empty. Mornings when the silence was deafening. Moments where she wondered if choosing solitude meant giving up. But in that space, in that sacred, uninterrupted stillness, something remarkable happened. She started hearing her own voice again. She started remembering what she liked, what made her laugh, what moved her to tears. She cooked meals just for herself and sat down to enjoy them slowly. She bought flowers, not to impress anyone, but simply because they made her smile. She looked at her body, aging and changing, and instead of criticizing it, she honored it. This body had carried her through birth, through loss, through labor and heartbreak. It had endured pain and pleasure, sacrifice and strength. And now, she treats it with kindness, not because someone else expects her to, but because she finally does. She no longer waits for someone to compliment her dress. She wears it because she loves how it feels. She no longer seeks validation in anyone's eyes. Her own are enough. And here's what no one tells you about falling in love with yourself at this stage in life. It's not selfish. It's not sad. It's salvation. It's the kind of love that doesn't ask you to perform or perfect or prove. It just asks you to be. And for a woman who has spent decades being everything for everyone else, that is the sweetest, most radical act of love there is. Now, when people ask her if she's still single, she doesn't feel shame or need to justify. She simply says, "Yes, and I'm finally happy." Because she knows now, the most important relationship she'll ever have is the one she has with herself. She walks into her own home and feels peace. She listens to her own thoughts and feels joy. She wakes up each day with no one to please but herself. And for the first time in her life, that is more than enough. She hasn't given up on love. She's just redefined it. And in doing so, she's found the kind that never runs dry. The kind that has been waiting for her all along. She doesn't need anyone's permission to live fully anymore. She no longer waits to be chosen, because she already chose herself. This isn't a story about loneliness. It's a story about liberation. About what happens when a woman who's spent decades giving finally turns toward herself with tenderness. About how silence can become sanctuary, and solitude can grow into strength. If you are a woman watching this, and you've ever been told you were too much or not enough, this space is for you. If you've stayed too long in places that didn't love you back, this message is for you. You are not behind, you are not broken, and you are not alone. This chapter you're in, whether it's single by choice, by change, or by circumstance, is not a waiting room. It is a homecoming. To your own voice, your own rhythm, your own worth. And if no one has told you lately, let me be the one to say it now. You are enough. You always have been. Thank you for being here, for being honest, for walking this journey with courage. If this message spoke to your heart, share it with another woman who needs to hear it. And let us know in the comments, what does being single mean to you at this stage of life? We're listening. We see you, and we honor your strength. Until next time, stay true, stay whole, and above all, stay in love with yourself.